What's the name of this building officially?
Legislative Office Building.
Thank you.
Of the state of Connecticut. Wajad, can you stay muted before you talk and just unmute at that time, if it's okay? We'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, everyone, distinguished guests, colleagues, and friends. I'm Senator Saud Anwar, and it's my honor to host this important conversation today. We are here to delve into a deeply troubling issue, the military-sanctioned massacre of pro-democracy activists in Pakistan, November 26, 2024. This conversation was triggered by many community members, my constituents, who had reached out to me about having this important discussion today. Some shared and they had felt that it was relevant to have this for a variety of reasons. Events that destabilize regions, like massacres and suppression of democracy, can have direct and indirect security implications for us in the United States. Understanding these events can help in assessing potential threats and fostering global stability, which in turn protects our interests. It is our responsibility that extends beyond our borders, and then we are part of a larger interconnected world community. It aligns with our moral and ethical commitments to support those who fight for their rights and freedoms, especially in places where those are under direct threat. Foreign governments have been threatening U.S. citizens and residents as well, and who have been vocal, and that's the transnational repression. This transnational repression refers to the efforts of a government to target, silence, or intimidate individuals who are located outside its borders, typically dissidents and activists and journalists, or members of minority groups who criticize or oppose the regime. This repression is often carried out through a combination of direct and indirect methods, such as surveillance, harassment, threats, or even physical harm. The aim is to suppress dissent and maintain control over diaspora communities or political opposition, even beyond the regime's physical jurisdiction. This phenomenon has raised concerns about human rights violations, sovereignty, and the misuse of international institutions. Why Pakistan is relevant at this time? It's a large community in the state of Connecticut who call Connecticut their home, United States their home. This community plays a vibrant role in the cultural and economic life of the state and contributes to its diversity and the multicultural dialogue. Pakistan as a country occupies a crucial geopolitical position bordering India, China, Afghanistan, and Iran. This location makes it a significant player in South Asian politics and an important ally in regional stability and security matters. As a nuclear-armed state, Pakistan's security and stability are of global concern. The U.S. and Pakistan have significant economic relations, with the U.S. being one of Pakistan's largest trading partners. Economic stability in Pakistan therefore impacts United States businesses and economic interests, especially in terms of trade and investment opportunities. Today, we'll hear from a distinguished panel of experts who will help us understand the struggles for democracy in Pakistan, details of the event of the recent massacre in Islamabad, and discuss the broader implications for international relations and media coverage. We do have a few speakers today, and many of our speakers are going to be joining us via Zoom, we are hoping to have a good conversation about this topic. And today we are hoping that one of our speakers is going to be Dr. Moeed Pirzada, who will provide an overview of the democracy movement in Pakistan and its global context. We also have Wajahat Saeed, who will share his investigative findings on the tragic events in Islamabad. And we'll also have Brian Grimm, who will address the impact of media coverage in the U.S. government's response to these events. And we'll also have Malika Samadani, who will be here to discuss the role of the American public in supporting international human rights at this time. Today's hearing is a call to all of us to stand in solidarity with those who seek justice and democracy. It's about starting with understanding. It's about ensuring that the principles of human dignity and freedom are upheld everywhere. Thank you for your engagement and commitment to these critical global issues, and let's begin with some of our presentations. I do know that one of our first speakers was Moeed Pirzada, but I do not see him joining here yet, but he just messaged he was traveling, and he's just in Washington, D.C., just arrived. He's going to be joining us shortly, but I'm going to ask Wajahat Saeed Khan. Wajahat is a Pakistani American who's the only Emmy-nominated journalist of Pakistani heritage, based in New York and known for his tough-talking interviews and frontline reporting. He's a former NBC bureau chief in Afghanistan, and Wajahat is also a fearless individual who instills fear in the people he speaks to and speaks about at times. And he has about over 500,000 some people who are listening into our conversation as well, along with the people in the state of Connecticut. So Wajahat, welcome. Thank you for joining us, and you're on.
Good morning. Thank you, Senator. Thank you for doing this. This is essential. It's important. It's critical because it concerns all of us. I was hoping to live stream this, but because I am jumping the queue, I am going to take advantage of winging it and recording this at a later time. People in Pakistan are listening to this, as well as people in the great state of Connecticut. I have a long tradition, a long relationship with Connecticut. I audited some classes at Yale when I was a college student here in the US. That was around 2 decades ago. That was a very different time. Pakistan's military was quite cozy with the US administration then. But at least at that time, the US administration was not tolerant of all the things the Pakistani military was getting up to. There was a different dictator then. There's a different military leader now. At that time, the US was very congenially and very politely egging Pakistan into the right directions of progress, of liberalism. That has stopped today. It's been around a week since a military-sanctioned massacre has been conducted by security forces, which include Pakistan's regular infantry troops, special forces troops, paramilitary rangers, paramilitary frontier corps personnel, and police. Now, overall, the numbers of security troops deployed in Islamabad and its environs is estimated to have been above 50,000. That is almost a man-to-man coverage of the protesters who started marching from different parts of Pakistan across the board, but most of them coming in from the northwestern Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, which is the political hub of ousted and now incarcerated Prime Minister Imran Khan. There was around a two-week heads up given by Khan, who's been incarcerated for over a year now on flimsy charges, which the international media has rejected. Most Pakistani courts have rejected these charges. In fact, there are no charges. He is just under arbitrary detention as of this latest report to you. Anyways, Khan had given a heads up to the authorities and called this a final call of freedom of protest. The PTI, which is not just Pakistan's biggest political party and most popular political party, but is also possibly Pakistan's only national political party. And we saw that effects take place as people from Karachi, which is around almost 1,000 kilometers from the capital, march. As people from Balochistan, which is about as far away from the capital, march. The fact that most of the participants, estimated to be around 50, 60,000 by most independent estimates, came in from Imran Khan's political hub over a 2 to 3 day slow trek was a logistical feasibility, but it was also actually delayed, even though it's just a 3 hour or a 2.5 hour drive from Peshawar, which is the capital of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, to Islamabad. This march actually took almost 2 to 3 days. Why? Because all sorts of roadblocks, all sorts of obstacles were in place, implemented one after the other by the federal and Punjab governments, which are the political hub of the ruling political alliance run by the Pakistan Muslim League, as well as the Pakistan People's Party and other political parties. Anyways, that's where the protests context comes in. But other things happened on the way as well. Thousands of rounds of tear gas, thousands of rubber bullets were fired. There was a battle of attrition as people who were simply marching for their rights, people who were simply marching for all sorts of freedoms, whether it is the freedom to assemble, whether it is the freedom to vote, whether it is the freedom to express themselves freely, or even fighting a new wave of suppression, which is digital and internet freedom in Pakistan. There were people not just from the PTI, but all sorts of walks of life. There were regular civilians who joined the crowd as they came in through different streams of different provinces. And then, as they arrived in the capital, around the late afternoon, the middle to late afternoon period in Islamabad, the capital of the world's 5th largest country, well, the world's 5th largest army was ready for them. There was a long avenue, ironically named Jinnah Avenue, which is after the founding father of Pakistan. And on this avenue, these people found themselves to be fish in a barrel, being shot just to that effect, being picked off as they slowly marched with sniper rifles, weapons grade, ready for war gear. We have ample documentary evidence about automatic weapons used from the BBC to Reuters to Al Jazeera to the New York Times. The reports vary, but there is convergence on the following facts. There were at least 12 casualties, fatalities reported. There were at least 60 to 70 other GSWs or gunshot wounds reported. There was the crackdown happened in 2 phases. First in the afternoon, and then in the dark of the night, when a complete blackout was implemented in this area. The internet was shut down. People were gassed, and then even the property that they got with them, like vehicles, were set ablaze and destroyed. The chief minister of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, who is an elected official and the right-hand man of Imran Khan, claims that his car was attacked with live ammunition. Now, the use of live ammunition is a complicated venture when it comes to battling riots. The UN is very strict about the use of proportionality and very strict about the conditions that must go with that proportionality, especially if this is for protective measures, then it's allowed. There were no protective measures required. The marchers were unarmed. They did not have what you would call any sorts of arms, even though the military-backed regime at this point has been pushing a narrative and circulating older videos of other marches which were armed. So firstly, the propaganda began just around the night of the massacre. Now, the another question is, what is a massacre? And this is something we've been debating. The organizers of this debate have been actually talking about this as well. Is it 5? Is it 10? Is it 50? It depends on how you look at it. But as far as I'm concerned, the numbers are not clear. The government claims that zero casualties, 0 people have been killed. This is unbelievable. Coming from the Interior Minister and the Information Minister, this is a glaring oversight of the facts. The several newspapers and the latest report, which I wanted to share, and I will be doing that in the group chat if you're up for it, is by Al Jazeera, which lists out the dead who are not counting. And at least 12 of these victims have been named and identified. Different hits to the head with firearms, different hits to different parts of the bodies, all belie the rules of engagement when it comes to riot control. As anybody who's covered or has been involved in political protest, when armed police or security personnel are deployed, their job is not to kill people, but to control people. But headshots obviously indicate, especially when they are executed with sniper weapons, which are designed for anti-personal use, go on to indicate something more sinister. But the story doesn't end there. Hospitals were advised, government-run hospitals were advised not to release the list of the dead or the wounded. This is abysmal. It's horrific, but not as horrific as the fact that when the relatives of these gunshot victims turned up from different parts of the country to claim the bodies of their loved ones, they were denied access and only given access on one premise, that they have to sign an affidavit saying that they will not be filing charges against the state. So what you have here is first you kill people, and once they're dead, you don't release their names and data. And then on top of that, when the loved ones come to collect their bodies, you tell them that don't tell anyone, don't fight this. The mainstream media in Pakistan has blatantly failed to report on this. Independent media like my channel, as well as the channels of other experts and publications of other experts like Muradsaeed and Ryan Grimm, have been the leading line of reporting on this. But again, we are undergoing our own pressures when it comes to transnational suppression, which is a whole other debate, which I hope we come to in this briefing. But overall, here are the facts recapped. There was a massacre in Islamabad. It was conducted by either directly by the military or military-backed troops. How do we know that? We saw them in uniform. How do we know that? We saw weapons seized and procured from the melee of the riot by the protesters themselves. These weapons had no place at all when it comes to riot control, considering the type, grade, and categorization of the weapons. And when the massacre was conducted, first slowly in the course of the afternoon on the 26th, through sniper fire, picking one protester off after the other, and then in at least a 20-minute melee in a blacked-out corner of this avenue, the numbers, the data was not released. The blackout was not just for electricity, there was a digital blackout as well. And once the dust had settled down and the fog of war had subsided, then something else happened, something more sinister. The numbers were fudged. The data was hidden. Journalists who were trying to figure out who to call, which hospital had housed which bodies, those journalists were abducted themselves. This is a tragedy. It's a travesty. It must be condemned. It must be investigated, and the people who are investigating it should be supported. Meanwhile, I urge the legislators who are listening to this to take this not just as an isolated incident, but consider the larger context of where Washington is coming in from. For the last two and a half years, the Biden administration has turned an eye, has shied away from making a brave, bold, and clear statement to condemn what's been happening in Pakistan. We've all learned about the nuclear escalation ladder. We all know about how it works. And it keeps on climbing. If you keep on climbing that ladder, bad things happen. What's happening right now in Pakistan is yet another huge step in the political escalation ladder. Things are going nuclear in Pakistan. People are being shot dead on the streets, and then their bodies are not being accounted for. And those who are accounting for the dead are being abducted themselves. This must go to Washington, because it doesn't just apply to the constituents of this great legislature in the great state of Connecticut, but this must go to Washington, because in the larger scheme, Washington is one of the largest backers, one of the main backers of this military-backed government. Washington is also clearly if not quiet, an influential figure in Pakistan, and that's the word from Washington matters. And I hope that the legislators here go on and use their great offices and influence to talk to the folks in Washington to do something bolder than what they've been doing so far since the last week. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Wajahat. Thank you for highlighting the recent massacre, which again, as I listen to you, it's very concerning. And then I know we'll have a number of questions and discussions about this with you in a moment. I wanted to invite the next speaker. That's Mr. Dr. Moeed Pirzada. He's a prominent British Pakistani geostrategic analyst, a TV anchor, columnist, a blogger, vlogger. He's currently based out of Washington, D.C. His YouTube channel is heard approximately by over 1 million times a week. He's been a thought leader, and at times I call him like a one-person think tank. And Moeed Pirzada, Dr. Pirzada, thank you for joining us, and you're on. You're muted. Can you unmute yourself? Thank you.
Okay. Senator Saud and the other participants, and Wajahat Saeed Khan and everyone else. Can you hear me, sir?
Very well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Senator Saud. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity, and to all the organizers. I also heard Wajahat Saeed Khan, my colleague and a journalist from Pakistan, who has described the events very well. Let me add a few more things about it. I have lived in Islamabad. I'm a known Pakistani television anchor person, worked across television channels, but I have also lived in Islamabad continuously from year 2008 till 2022 November, when I was supposed to leave Islamabad because of the political set of circumstances. And my office, one of my offices from where I used to run my publication, was right at the place which is called D Chowk, which now many prefer to call as the Bloody Chowk or the Death Chowk. So my office used to be there, and this is the area which I'm very familiar with because I've lived all my life in that city. This particular highway road is called as Jinnah Avenue. It has three distinct sections. The first section, which has seen this massacre, was actually totally shut down, and no one really knows as to how many people have really been shot or killed, because there are also reports that the army trucks took away the dead bodies, and once the people ran off, there wasn't really a clear understanding as to what really happened at that point, right? So the death toll of the 12, which was said by Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf, and subsequently, I think in last 12 hours we heard the death toll has raised to 14, is quite an understatement. In my video commentaries on it, I have reminded people of a novel that was written by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, 100 Years of Solitude, to which many people across the United States are familiar with. This actually recounts the 1928 banana massacre in Colombia, when the laborers of the banana farms, the farmers, were collected in the railway station and were shot at in a closed area, and no one ever knew what the death toll was. Subsequently, the academics and researchers have found out that the death toll was anywhere between 1,000 to 2,000. People were whisked away in trucks and trains, and their bodies were dumped in different places, or in mass graves, or in the sea. Similar is the situation in Pakistan. While the media are now confirming, the international media, that there are 12 to 14 deaths, the government is saying that no firing took place and no one has died. This is the first important aspect of the thing which I want to register. The second thing which I want to register over here is that this Pakistani massacre has took place in a very, what is the location of this place? What is commonly known as D Chowk was the last point before you can go towards Pakistan's constitutional avenue. The significance of the murder of the massacre is that it has taken place within literally a few hundred meters of Pakistan's parliament and Pakistan's Supreme Court, Pakistan's presidency. Killing people for democracy protesters at this point is like people who assemble outside the Capitol Hill in Washington, or people who are demonstrating for any political cause outside White House, or people who regularly, in few dozen times, collect outside the 10 Downing Street in Britain, or anywhere in Strasbourg outside the European Parliament. It is that kind of symbolism. So was there anything really happening that could justify, sometimes the word rioting is used. There was no rioting over there. Sometimes the law enforcement authorities do have an excuse to fire upon the people, or when protesters go berserk, when they're attacking government buildings, they try to enter the government buildings, they are looting the banks, they're burning the banks, or they're looting the money machines, or they're attacking the government vehicles or the police vehicles. In this particular case, nothing like that has happened. The episodes of firing from the snipers, these were the army snipers, to the best of my understanding, because I've spoken to eyewitnesses. They are not even paramilitary snipers, because paramilitary snipers wear a different uniform, and the army people wear a different uniform. We have reason to believe this thing, that these are actually regular army troops, not police, not the paramilitaries that were brought. And there's also evidence to suggest, and statements coming from responsible politicians in the opposition, that they were used special military grade weapons for this. And so there was no cause. The people, and while the first initial episode of sniping took place in the evening, and some of the dead bodies that had been brought to the hospitals are reported at 5 p.m., 5:30 p.m., or 6 p.m., the real bulk of the firing came after 11 p.m. I think one of the figure which has been quoted is 11:47 p.m. to the exact time. That was the time when many demonstrators, they were disappointed by their political leadership not taking a clear position, and they were actually much more than a kilometer or 1.5 or 2 kilometers before this point had even started to go back. So what I'm actually saying is that this massacre has been done by the military, by the Pakistani military, to create what is called in political science a moral impact. So they wanted to send a message that any kind of protest which the military bans or forbids cannot take place in Pakistan. So there was no real cause apart from the fact that they wanted to impress upon the public. So I think my last point is that, as Wajahat also mentioned, for the past 33 months, there's an increasing escalating level of violence by the state authorities and a government, which is illegal in nature, against the people of Pakistan. It is no more about one political party, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf or Imran Khan, but somehow the other it is being framed in a way as if it is all about Imran Khan. It is not. It is actually about the nature of Pakistani regime, which is a military regime run by the generals, and its atrocities against the people of Pakistan in the 5th largest nation state in the world, which is the 2nd largest Muslim nation state with 250 million approximately population, has been totally ignored by the executive branch in Washington. Yes, the notice has been taken by the US senators and by the US congressmen, and many of them in the last 30 plus months have gone to Twitter, have passed the statements, the resolutions, have attended the seminars, and there is of course the House Resolution 901 regarding the political situation and the nature of elections in Pakistan, asking for accountability and pressing upon the Biden administration. But had the US administration taken a firm stand, then this massacre would not have taken place. The present regime in Pakistan is wholly and solely dependent upon the Western generosity. It actually absorbs about close to $10 billion each year. It is reaching out to IMF despite not fulfilling the conditionalities of the IMF. It is being bailed out through IMF after every few months. But not only this, it is absorbing something like $2 to $4 billion of World Bank. It is absorbing something like $2 to $3 billion of the Asian Development Bank, and it is absorbing something like $2 to $3 billion of the Department for International Development, which is also called as UK Aid. So here is the context in which I want the senators, the legislators in the Connecticut to focus their minds on, and this has to be taken up in Washington. I will end here and look towards the questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mohit Pirzada. I appreciate your insight. I will have questions for sure. Our next speaker is Mr. Ryan Grimm. He's a co-founder and reporter at Dropsite News and a well-known investigative journalist. He's a former DC bureau chief at The Intercept and The Huffington Post. Ryan Grimm is celebrated for his ability to uncover compelling stories and explain complex political dynamics with clarity and nuance. He's one person who makes sure that the White House press secretary, no matter who they are, no matter who the president is, they really, really earn their salaries. So, Ryan, welcome. You're on.
Yes, I look forward to helping whoever Marco Rubio puts in the State Department. Look forward to making that person earn their salary as well. No, I would just endorse what Lloyd said previously. I think that there's a lot more to uncover about this massacre, and I think in particular, and this is something we're working on over at Dropsite, we able to come out with fairly soon. I believe that this was, and all indications are that we're getting from our sources over there, that this was a premeditated massacre, that this was planned from the top, that this was not just something that kind of went a little hairy at the end and had a few kind of people on the ground making split decisions. And I think people need to understand how it is that the military-backed government could, or the military itself could get itself into a position where they felt like they could carry out a planned execution of unarmed civilians and to get away with it. And that goes back to the unapologetic and uncritical support that the United States has offered over the past several years, putting what they perceive to be their geopolitical interests above the stated principles that the United States stands for. And I think that the willingness to look the other way and to tacitly support human rights violations of such a serious, broad, and deep variety of Pakistan deeply undermines one of the key foreign policy attributes that the United States has, which is that it is looked to by the world, despite its long record of operating contrary to its stated principles. Its stated principles are so universally held in aspiration that it stands as a beacon for the world. And when it so thoroughly undermines those principles, then it leaves itself in a more of a transactional situation vis-a-vis other countries. China, for instance, does not go around saying that it is going to preach the virtues of democracy and human rights. But China is going to engage in transactional relationships with other countries. And so if the United States gives up the moral high ground, now they're stuck negotiating with other countries on China's transactional terms. And the United States is not equipped to win those. So I think even in its own terms, I think the U.S. policy is failing in moral terms and in terms that the United States set out for itself. It's quite obviously failing in a truly appalling way. The media, which I am a part of here, has effectively ignored for the most part. So I'm happy to. So I noticed I was muted for 1 second. I'm happy to take in any questions as well. I'm just privileged to be here.
Thank you so much, Ryan. We have our fourth speaker, and then we'll go into the question and answers after that. So next speaker is Mahlika Samadani, who's physically at the Legislative Office building, sitting next to me. She's a community leader and an activist working on issues related to human rights, democracy, and the rule of law in Pakistan. An individual with unparalleled energy. She has been instrumental in getting everybody over here together, our many speakers. Her previous roles have included an adjunct fellow with the Post-Conflict Construction Project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies and a research analyst at the Council on Foreign Relations, focusing on women's empowerment in the Muslim world. Mahlika has extensive experience in conflict and transitional settings, including Pakistan, Sudan, Afghanistan, Bosnia, Israel, Palestine, and has been involved in civil society-based peace initiatives between India and Pakistan as well. Mahlika, welcome, and you're on.
Thank you so much, Senator Anwar. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Senator Anwar, thank you so much for organizing this very important hearing. Thank you so much for, is that better? For organizing this very important hearing in the Connecticut State Legislature on the recent massacre in Islamabad. Today, I'm going to speak about why it is so important for your constituents and our legislators to learn about the deteriorating political and human rights situation in Pakistan, and why their attention, their advocacy, and their engagement on this issue of democracy and human rights is so critical. We just heard in great detail about the horrific events of November 26th, in which Pakistan's security forces used lethal weapons against unarmed civilians. Although this most recent aggression appears especially severe, this is not the first time the Pakistani military leadership has targeted its own citizens. In 1971, it engaged in mass slaughter of its Bengali citizens in East Pakistan to suppress their quest for greater autonomy. In recent decades, it has abducted, tortured, and killed thousands of Baloch, Sindhi, and Pashtun nationalists, and this continues today. In the U.S. war on terror, it disappeared thousands of Pakistani citizens, sending many to CIA black sites without charge or trial. As you have heard today, over the past couple of years, the Pakistani military and the regime it backs have muzzled the media, assaulted pro-democracy activists, engaged in transnational repression, arbitrarily shut down the internet and mobile services, intimidated and threatened high court judges, and have continued to abduct and disappear civil society activists. As Americans, we deem our democratic norms and ideals to be sacred. We deem sacred our right to peaceful protest, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of expression. We cherish these values, and we will do all we can here in this country as American citizens to uphold them. It is therefore just as important for us to ensure that our government, the US government, does not undermine these values in other parts of the world. And yet, for far too long, successive US administrations have strengthened ties with Pakistan's military to pursue their Cold War and counterterrorism agendas. This has not only enriched and emboldened the Pakistani military, but has undermined the rule of law, due process, and human rights in the country. Once a venerated institution in Pakistan, the military is now viewed with contempt by millions of Pakistanis in the country and in the diaspora. It is no longer sustainable for the US government to continue its support of the Pakistani military and risk its long-term relationship with a population of 240 million, 2/3 of which is under 30. Also, as American citizens, and I'm making this appeal to everybody who's listening in today from the state of Connecticut and across the US, we can no longer ignore our government's misguided policies abroad because we know they have far-reaching consequences for Americans here at home. They do not make us safe, as we have seen with the emergence of Al-Qaeda, the Taliban, and ISIS. It is therefore high time for US taxpayers, legislators, human rights defenders, and media outlets to question the US administration's willingness to sacrifice democracy and human rights concerns on the altar of strategic interest. American taxpayers should not have their hard-earned dollars finance brutal regimes. Not only is this against our values, it is against our laws. For instance, the Leahy laws, which prohibit Congress from authorizing funds to militaries that violate international human rights standards. While not yet verified, there are reports that some of the weapons used, the war-grade weapons used against the protesters in Islamabad, were American-made Remington 700 rifles. I urge everyone listening to call on Connecticut's congressional delegation and also the two senators and request them to call for an independent investigation into the slaughter that took place on November 26th and the subsequent alleged cover-up. This will be consistent with Amnesty International that issued the following statement. Amnesty calls for a prompt, thorough, impartial, effective, and transparent investigation into the deaths and injuries of protesters, as well as the unlawful use of force, including lethal and less lethal weapons by security personnel. Once this investigation has taken place, American constituents should call on their representatives to impose sanctions, visa bans, and asset freezing against those in Pakistan's military leadership who authorize the use of lethal force against unarmed protesters. This will be consistent with a congressional letter to President Biden that was signed by 62 congressional Democrats, including Representatives Hayes, Larson, Courtney, and DeLauro, that called for visa bans and asset freezes against individuals like General Asim Munir, who are implicated in human rights violations. Finally, this is a pivotal moment, not just for the people of Pakistan, but for us as Americans to show our commitment to democratic norms, human rights, rule of law, and due process. Nothing will make a greater mockery of our values if at this critical juncture we choose to remain silent.
Thank you so much, Malika. Very clear and very powerful message from each and every one of you. I wanted to ask this first question, and Ryan, you touched on it, but anyone else can answer that too, along with you. Why is it that the U.S. policymakers are so sloppy, that they are making such a myopic policy where you have 70-80% of a country's population, the fifth most populous country, and they're looking the other way and allowing this to happen, expecting that this is going to be a sustainable policy? And so they're smart people. I have difficulty understanding why such smart people make such poor policies. Anyone, Ryan, you can start, and Moeed and Bajahat can jump in.
Yeah, I'll make two really quick points, and then I'm sure the others have much more elaborate thoughts on this. But I think on the one hand, I think from the State Department's perspective, we're talking
Recording
about
in progress.
like the United States State Department is used to dealing with the Pakistan military. Like that is what they have known, and that's what they've always known, and that's what they're comfortable with. They're used to civilian governments being weak, being ineffective, being pushed out when they're inconvenient or completely decapitated, and so I don't think they're even thinking necessarily. It's just that's just what they're used to doing. And I think on Capitol Hill, the members of Congress defer very heavily to the State Department when it comes to these questions, especially if there's no cross pressure. There is now some growing cross pressure from the Pakistani diaspora here in the United States that is putting the pressure on members of Congress, and so now they are starting to actually look at it with fresh eyes and look at it clearly and cleanly, and they are coming to a different conclusion, the conclusion that you suggested. So I think the only explanation is that they're not thinking. They are smart, but they're not thinking, because once anybody starts to think about this, then they say, wait a minute, this is not even working for our own purposes.
Thank you. Anyone else? Moeed, if you want to unmute, and then you can.
So, Senator Saud, can you hear me now?
Very well.
Yes. I heard Ryan Grimm. I think he has actually made a very substantive comment as to what is really happening over here. I have also been trying to meet the officials of the Department of the State and the other people that work in the U.S. government, off the record. And I've also been reading about this subject a lot. I studied international relations at Columbia University 24 years ago in New York. The whole relationship between Pakistan and the United States has been contingent since 1955 on the military-to-military relationship. And this is also an intelligence relationship. So within Washington, the Pakistani military exercises influence through CENTCOM, the Central Command, and through Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, and also the Department of the State. So what they have actually found, as Brian mentions, it is very convenient for them to take up the telephone and talk to the army chief. Even when there are, on the face of it, there is a civilian elected government in Pakistan, the United States administrations have actually gone through and resolved all over whatever the demands are or issues they want to put up on the Pakistani map. They always have dealt with the army chief. So army chief and army chief's other generals in Pakistan's intelligence community, inter-services intelligence, becomes the main conduit of relationship. There has never been a people-to-people, democracy to democracy, or a relationship between, say, the corporations, the business organizations. I think and everything is deferred as to given the advice or the suggestion or the structured opinion that is coming from CIA and CENTCOM. I think the challenge we have for the Pakistani community and for the legislators is to reach out to those committees that oversee the work of the intelligence, oversee the work of the CENTCOM, and there we have to put up the argument that in a country which is the second largest Muslim nation, which is the fifth largest nation in the world, with almost 240 to 250 million population, that needs to be dealt in a different way. And given the huge unpopularity of the Pakistani military, this is no more a reliable partner for the United States government to deal with Pakistan. I think this is the approach we have to take now.
So, Malika, you have a comment.
Yes, so as has already been mentioned, I feel, Senator Anwar, that the State Department has always found it much easier to communicate with the Pakistani military, but also in very particular terms because of its Cold War strategy, as Dr. Pizada just mentioned, and now for its counterterrorism agenda. It has always relied on the Pakistani military as sort of pursuing or implementing its agenda in the region. And for some reason, the Pakistani military has been somewhat successful in convincing State Department officials that they are their bulwark against the rise of violent extremism, and they're the ones that are going to keep the country stable in order to protect access to nuclear weapons, which is a huge strategic concern of the United States. However, again, you said that they're very smart people, but that comes into doubt when we see how the Pakistani military over the decades, during the Cold War and since then as well, has actively cultivated militant groups to advance its own foreign policy objectives and also domestic policy objectives. And so we know that the Pakistani military has been cultivating these groups. And so for it to present itself as somebody that is going to protect the US from these groups doesn't make any sense. What is encouraging at this point is that despite the fact that successive US administrations have remained sort of mute about human rights violations in Pakistan, the Pakistani diaspora is now so mobilized that it is relying on their congressional representatives to build the narrative, a counter narrative in Washington through Congress, through their letters, through their resolutions. House Resolution 901, as you saw earlier this year, was passed by 368 votes to 7. And then we've had multiple letters since then, which are calling out the US administration's complicity and silence when it comes to human rights violations.
I'd like to quickly weigh in as well, please.
Please.
So it's quite basic, right? The policy for Pakistan is unfortunately dominated by the prism of the Department of Defense and Langley, not the DOS, not the State Department, which creates this monster which we're dealing with. Now, just summarizing everyone's cases here, yes, for years, in fact, for decades, the army has been Washington's best bet to deliver on whatever programs and ideas and foreign policy maneuvers it has in mind. It used the army in the Cold War against the Russians, and then it is using the army these days in its counterterrorism strategy, as explained earlier. But this best bet business seems to be running thin because the army has, yes, it has been a best bet because it's been pretty popular, it's been pretty powerful, it's been well loved. Well, those days are gone. And as far as the current debate is concerned, well, it's not the only debate in the room. The army is at war with the people of Pakistan itself. There are problems with the Baloch population, which is the largest province in that country, the longest running insurgency, which has nothing to do with Imran Khan or PTI or even democracy for that matter. It's a separatist insurgency, is running amok. In fact, they now have women being recruited as suicide bombers there. The Pashtun cause is now merging with violent extremism, with some sort of evidence now coming ahead as the Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan, the Pakistani Taliban, ISIS KP, which is the local branch of ISIS there, and angry young Pashtun men and perhaps even women are getting recruited by violent extremist and terrorist groups. Of course, my hometown in Karachi has long had ethnic problems suppressed by powerful military because of the ethnic nature of that city. Pakistan is at war with itself, and the army is no longer loved or popular, and this best bet business is going to run thin because ultimately what you're looking at is army with very little control. The state is losing its own writ. There's very little control. And as far as stability is concerned, we're just a hop, skip, and jump away from the merger of more violent extremist groups with more nationalist options. We're just a block or two away from some sort of an attack on a military installation. Pakistan is a nuclear weapons country. It's the only Islamic nuclear weapons state. That is of supreme concern to people in Washington, and they need to start looking at the bigger picture. And even when it comes to their own constituents, this is now beginning to affect Americans and their families here, their businesses there, their properties there. This is now coming home to roost because while the mute attitude, the blind eye, the turned cheek has worked well for geopolitical purposes, the best bet business is getting really old. It's very 2020. This is a very different Pakistan right now.
Thank you, Wajat. Wow. This is, and I just want to go to a next question. And Connecticut is a special place for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons I'll just add is that we have some amazing members of Congress who are relevant right now to this issue. And I'll start with you, Ryan, because I know you have a hard stop at 1:30. We'll continue our conversation. If you can stay for longer, we'd love that too. But we have Representative Jim Himes. He's a ranking member of the House Permanent Select Committee on Intelligence, which plays a crucial role in overseeing the United States intelligence community. And we also have Senator Murphy, who's actively involved in shaping the U.S. foreign policy, especially through his chairmanship in the Subcommittee on Near East, South Asia, Central Asia, and Counterterrorism. So I'll make sure that they listen to what we're saying right now, because they're my friends as well. Would you be able to say what needs to be said that they need to hear with the current ground reality? And we are going to have this conversation in an open public forum, if you will, so that we are on the record, so that if people make poor choices, they would hear that somebody in a public forum said that this is the way to approach this. So Ryan, you can start and others can join in. Thank you.
Sure, and I think Chris Murphy in particular is increasingly well versed on this subject. And Murphy, along with Chris Van Hollen, a senator from Maryland, are among the most respected Democratic senators when it comes to talking about it now. They're not going to matter much over the next 4 years, but they will matter in terms of building democratic support for democracy in Pakistan. I think what we would say to Senator Chris Murphy is, don't just listen to the State Department briefings that you're getting. Speak to people who have spent time in Pakistan. In fact, Chris Van Hollen was born in Pakistan. His parents both served there with the State Department in Langley. So just as Republicans are fond of saying, do your own research. And I think any member of Congress, Republican or Democrat, who does their own research into this question will come away with the right answer.
Thank you. And we can go Malika next, and then Moeed or Wajat, one of you. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for pointing out, some of the very important members of the congressional delegation here in Connecticut, Senator Anwar. And, we've had a lot of luck with a lot of congressional representatives here in Connecticut. There are 5 in total. And for a lot of the resolutions, for a lot of the letters, we've had support of a majority of them. I will say, not to single him out, but Congressman Himes has been somewhat reticent in giving us the support that we needed on the 2 letters that have just come out on Pakistan. One of them that was signed by 62 congressional Democrats, and that included 4 members of the Connecticut congressional delegation, except Congressman Himes. So we really need everybody here from Connecticut who is his constituent to call him and tell him the importance of this, and especially because his colleagues have been very open about their support. And one of those letters was, again, calling for the release of all political prisoners as echoed by the UN Working Group on Arbitrary Detentions. And it also, for the first time, a congressional letter named General Asim Munir as a person who has been committing has this credible evidence of him having committed human rights violations. So we really need our congressional reps to get behind us on this. We have Senator Markey in Massachusetts, who's been very vocal with his tweets, and so we're really looking to Senator Chris Murphy to show his support and maybe even initiate a letter in the Senate akin to what we had in the House about human rights violations in Pakistan. And again, we need the Pakistani American community, but we need our allies in the general American community to help us push this forward.
Thank you. And before Wajat or Moeed speak, I just want to mention that when a Congress member is going to sign on a letter, if there are chairperson of a committee or they're the ranking members, it gets tricky on that issue to sign on. So that may be one of the reasons that there may be hesitancy. But Wajahat, do you want to go first before Moeed this time?
Sure. I think every signature counts. And I must confess that the people of Pakistan and their friends and families here, who may or may not be your constituents, but they are definitely Americans, are so desperate right now for each and every signature because it means so much. It makes the headlines in Pakistan. It might not even make the local papers here in the US, but it means so much for the democratic struggle in Pakistan. And to all the members of Congress who are listening in, and of course, the other folks in Washington who reside in high offices, this is something that you are partially responsible for as well. There's a moral underpinning here. Washington is that city on a hill, that beacon on a hill, which people all over the world look up to. There's over 1 million Pakistani Americans who are getting organized, they're getting galvanized. They're going to be calling you one of these days, and they're going to be asking questions. Washington has long played a role, an influential role in this region, in this country. And now that this monster is finally truly unleashed, not on Afghanistan, not on Iran, not on China, but on the people of Pakistan themselves, who are friends, relatives, brothers, sisters, mothers and fathers of your own constituents. There's a moral obligation to all of this as well, which is the undergirding of American democracy. So please, this is going to come home to roost very soon. It's affecting your constituents, their friends and families and businesses. And I hope you consider the importance of any future legislation which is tabled on your desk. Thank you.
Thank you. Moeed.
Senator Saud, thank you so much. Senator Saud, for Senator Chris Murphy, for Congressman Jim Hines, and all of the legislators, and I'm sure this recording will be shared with many others. I want to make a point that one of the biggest challenge right now is that you cannot find the truth, what is really happening in Pakistan. This massacre has taken place in a context in which it is now literally impossible, not only for the Pakistani media or the social media to report the facts of what really happens, but also for the common people. Starting from May 2022, when the first crackdown happened across Punjab, according to a very conservative estimate from the police sources, at least 20,000 in several instances of mass arrests, more than 20,000 Pakistanis have been arrested. After the incidents of the 9th May, within 48 hours, the Punjab government officially admitted that it had arrested more than 9,700 people within the past 24 hours, and they had already made the list. So this process has been going on, and they have shut down all avenues from where any accurate reporting on the events can actually be done. Not only forget about the Pakistani media, the television media, the Pakistani, the newspapers. The situation since 17th of February 2024, they have shut down Twitter in Pakistan, which was one of the biggest source of facts and information where people can upload the images. All social media, and they're bringing in more and more laws. Now, the extension of all the tyranny and the repression in Pakistan, in which this massacre has taken place, on which they said that no firing has taken place, is transnational repression. So my relatives and cousins have been picked up. There are hundreds of Pakistani Americans whose relatives and business associates and friends have been picked up in Pakistan, roughed up, detained, and harassed to make the Pakistani Americans silent on the issues within Pakistan. I mean, so it is no more the question. I mean, how can you expect, under these circumstances, the Pakistani newspapers, reporters, television, commentators, anchor person, TV hosts, and human rights organizations within Pakistan that live within the geography of Pakistan to report on the facts? That is why you only hear about 12 deaths and you're not hearing about 500 deaths or 350 deaths in Pakistan, because such is the nature of the tyranny of the Pakistani regime that it is using all its apparatus to even stop the Pakistani diasporas in United States, Canada, United Kingdom, Europe, Australia, New Zealand. I mean, there is a prominent Pakistani activist that lives in Australia. His brother was picked up, and there's so many other instances. So it is, I think the matter has reached a point where these issues have to be debated within the special committees of the United States, House, the House of Representatives, and within the Senate, as to understand what is really happening in Pakistan. In the various manifestations, what I'm mentioning in this massacre would not have taken place if the United States government and the Biden administration has not remained silent for so long.
Thank you so much. This is very insightful. I'll actually pick up on one of the things that you have mentioned in a little bit. For the timing, I wanted to try and engage Ryan a little bit more. The audience that everybody has is a little different, but Ryan, your audience is much more progressive across the United States, people who are independent thinkers and who are very mobilizable. What role can you play to help educate the larger population to prevent this disaster from continuing to progress the way it is?
Yeah, we can do what we can to get the facts of the situation in front of people. And like I said, universally, whether you're serving on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee or you drive a truck for the railroad in Nebraska, as soon as you hear the facts of this case, in fact, of this particular situation, the answer becomes immediately clear. It's only with deep motivated reasoning and a lack of thinking that anybody can think differently. So we can do as much as we can. I think there needs to be more coverage on this issue from people in the mainstream press, which have decided that they're just basically going to ignore anything that's coming out of Pakistan, and certainly not going to question the kind of State Department line that's coming out of there. But you're right. There's a large audience of people now that are very familiar with what's going on over there. And with that, I have to get running to another event. But I deeply appreciate and am honored by the invitation to speak here.
Thank you for your time, and thank you for the work that you do every day. Give him a hard time.
I will.
Okay,
I will.
Thank you. All right. So back to Moeed, you touched on something, and we've had offline conversation on this, and I think this transnational repression is a very real thing. Many of the people in the communities that I'm interacting with, they're fearful of speaking out. They're fearful for their loved ones. And I know there's a federal law. And the relevance of this is that in this year, I tried to work with the Judiciary Committee. I'm not in the Judiciary Committee in the state of Connecticut. I was trying to have the Judiciary chair, who's a very good friend of mine, to actually propose a state law, which was going to be a mirror of the federal law. The reason is the federal resources are limited, but the state can actually also play an important role in collaboration and working with the federal agencies when the citizens of the state of Connecticut are going to be threatened by a foreign government, no matter what government that is. And I recently had a hearing about a few days ago with the Asian American community, and you'd be surprised how many other Asian Americans in the United States outside of Pakistan are threatened by their governments. So it's like pretty much everywhere it's happening, whether it's every single country. So I'm not going to name one of them or the other, but this is becoming more relevant for every state to have their own version of this law to protect their citizens. And I know that both you and Wajahat and perhaps others are not able to travel back and then be able to interact with their loved ones. Could you speak about that challenge? Could you speak about those difficulties, how they become so real, and how heroic your work is that you're endangering yourself at times from the people who are actively threatening you at times too, if you're up to speaking to that?
Yeah, thank you. Wajahat, go ahead.
I'll let you lead, Doc.
Okay, so let me explain, Senator Anwar. First of all, this transnational repression offers a very interesting challenge for the U.S. lawmakers. I'm very glad to hear that apart from the federal legislation and the lawmaking, there can be versions at the state level and funding available for this. Federal Bureau of Investigation had for past several months, more than a year, set up a hotline. The law has also been framed within Canada, and I think some kind of version is also now will be actually developing across Europe. Why the law is developing is a very interesting phenomenon. It has to do, this kind of law and this kind of situation didn't exist 10 years ago. This law was not needed 10 years ago. For the reason is this, that because of the rise in communication technology and because of the new media platforms, which are erroneously being referred to as social media. This is no more the social media. This is in fact the shape and form of the new media. Now, in countries like Pakistan, the traditional media has totally become irrelevant because all those people that exist within the geography of Pakistan, the Pakistani state agencies, the army and the intelligence can pick them up at will, can actually harass them into silence. So when Pakistani Americans anywhere in the world or in British or Europeans speak out, their relatives are picked up in Pakistan. So this is a totally new phenomena. And the sum total of that phenomena is this, that the governments, maybe in China, maybe in Pakistan, maybe in India, maybe in Iran or somewhere, or Russia, can actually impose their will. This is an extraterritorial jurisdiction in which the Pakistani military is now controlling the political dynamics and freedom of expression of the American citizens within the United States. And that is why this issue is very peculiar challenge. I think it has not been understood in that context so far. It is only being looked from a security prism, but this is the challenge. So you exist within the United States, you have your right to First Amendment according to United States Constitution and laws, but you cannot exercise your freedoms within the United States because the government sitting in Islamabad can harass your relatives over there or can target your businesses and financial interest. Thank you.
And to quickly weigh in here, Senator, the issue is that while the world is getting smaller, which is a good thing, and connected, which is a great thing, the issue which the folks in your legislature must consider about transnational repression is that it's already arrived. This is not just a desk at the FBI. This is not just a paper the State Department publishes, but one of America's great friends, India, which is right next door, has been engaged in transnational repression right here in New York City, where Indian officials have been subpoenaed, have been summoned, are being investigated for putting out a hit on a dissident right here in New York. The Canadian government is effectively at war with its counterparts in New Delhi, diplomatically speaking, because of a killing conducted there. There's been America's greatest friend, the United Kingdom, is investigating its own cases of transnational repression by both India and Pakistan, which is clearly right next door, but also inspired by the actions of its rival. So we must be very clear right now, both about our constituents in Connecticut, but also in the larger picture, whether it involves North America, whether it involves the Western Hemisphere. Regimes like Pakistan and governments like India, even though they run very differently, there's nothing really common in them except that they were once one country. They're coming for Americans. They're coming for the families of Americans. They're coming for the businesses of Americans. And in fact, they are already here. So transnational repression, everybody has a story. Mueed has his story. His friends, his cousins have been picked up. I have a similar story. Our other colleagues have similar stories. My family has been threatened, has survived abduction attempts. My partner here has been threatened as well by anonymous calls. I'm talking to the FBI. Mueed's talking to the FBI. We've been very transparent. But again, what we must rely on is the great officers of this legislature and the friends in Washington to do a little bit more. There is an FBI transnational repression division. What is it doing? Where are the investigations going? We must know more as well. As if they're transparent, then the government of these great United States must be transparent too.
Thank you. The next question I wanted to ask the panelists was that this particular massacre, what has happened is that has resulted in a threshold that has been crossed. They've crossed so many thresholds, but this was one that is now getting the coverage in the international media. And while this is getting more coverage in the international media, do you see that the current quote-unquote elected government versus the military backers, is there a rift between the two? They're blaming and pointing fingers at each other. Do you sense that they're recognizing that this particular recent massacre may have resulted in some things that would have some outcomes that would be change in how the rest of the world sees the current situation? Is somebody going to take a dive for this?
Okay, Senator Anwar, in the first instance, I think the coverage that has taken place in the international media is very insufficient. Looking at the enormity of what has happened, yes, the British publication Guardian has come up, BBC has written, Al Jazeera has covered it a bit. But I mean, if you look at the enormity of what has happened, there is very totally insufficient coverage of it. Apart from the fact that there might have been some reservations of the international media because of the factors we discussed earlier, because Pakistan is being looked at from a security lens of Central Intelligence Agency and CENTCOM, and there is some kind of issue over there. International media also relies upon, they do not have their own correspondents on ground in Pakistan. They rely upon the Pakistani citizens as reporters, who are also amenable to pressure from the Pakistani military. So there is not much coverage of what is really happening in Pakistan. This I know as a journalist. Most of us, we speak in Urdu because our audiences are in Urdu, and we do not have reach out to the English-speaking world, which is another barrier in understanding what is happening in Pakistan. The third, which you said, that is there a friction between the so-called elected government, which is not elected at all. I mean, when you look at the comprehensive position by the House Resolution 901, the Pakistani election, the way they were stolen in the midnight between the 8th and 9th February 2024, the government that is in place in Pakistan is a total sham. These are the people who didn't win the election at all. I mean, election was a total fraud. But immediately after the massacre in Islamabad, which has not been admitted as a massacre, which is being admitted as an incident, the government of Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif tried, in a very clever fashion, tried diverting it towards the military by saying this thing, that the government is very grateful to the Pakistani military for coming to the aid of the government and taking action in ridding the Islamabad of these, arsonists and these dangerous elements. So in a way, they wanted to put it on record that whatever has been done by the military. And we as Pakistani origin journalists who have spent their life looking at the dynamics fully understand that whatever has happened in Islamabad in the night of 26th November is simply beyond the capacity and the history and the convention of Pakistan's civilian administration, be it the police, the district management, or the elected or the unelected government. Whatever has happened directly as a will of the Pakistani military chief, who we believe is seriously disturbed psychologically. And it was his orders that these people have to be cleared, and they wanted to create a moral impact and a punishment upon the people of Pakistan for defying the will or the instructions of the military. I hope my comments help.
They do. And I think Malika wants to weigh in, and then Wajahat if you choose to.
Yeah, I mean, I will just say I completely agree with Dr. Pirzada about international coverage. I think we have people like Ryan Grimm, The Intercept, Dropsite, and other media outlets like those to thank for keeping the coverage alive. Otherwise, there really has not been any significant pieces except for the Guardian piece, which talked about the cover-up that happened after the massacre inside the hospitals. But I will say that, I mean, when you talked about the friction between the civil and military leadership, it has become even more obvious that the civilian government is basically the lackeys of the Pakistani military, right? The Pakistani military has been held responsible for all of the slaughter, the carnage that took place on the night of November 26th. And yet we do not have a single statement from DGISPR or any of the Pakistani military spokespersons responding to what happened or responding to the accusations. What we do have are people like the Interior Minister or Atatar, they're coming out again because they are lackeys of the Pakistani military, feeling like they have to come and justify what happened or they have to provide the cover-up. So I feel like that is not creating a rift because they know their position as junior partners of the Pakistani military, and they will not do anything to implicate their masters in this case.
Wajahat, you're muted.
To quickly weigh in about the coverage, I think it's been insufficient, and that's because I understand the information loophole. Let's just be honest. Pakistan and its neighbor Afghanistan have dropped off the map, have dropped off the radar of American mainstream media since 2020, since the pullout of U.S. forces in Afghanistan. Now that makes sense. That's fine. That's how news industries all over the world work. If something is not relevant, well, then why cover it? But I think it is quite relevant that there's been a massacre of innumerable data. We don't even know if 10, 20, 15, 100, 500 people have been killed. And I think that's something worth investigating. As a journalist, as someone who's worked for NBC, who has worked for CNN, this is just something which is worth it. But when I can understand how my colleagues in the US wouldn't cover it, but it is a story. Just around the same time that this massacre was happening, another massacre not too far from Islamabad in Parachinar was happening. Almost 150 people, Shias and Sunnis, were killed in a case of ethnic strife. 150 people killing each other anywhere in the world, Senator Saud, is a story. But it wasn't a story for American media. And that's where administration officials must come in. That's where it's the onus of the people in this legislature and the counterparts in other legislatures and offices in Washington and wherever else to know that this is where they can weigh in. Just a quote, a tweet, a citation, a retweet even of something which is important, which is happening in the world's fifth largest country, in a friend of the United States, well, a purported friend of the United States, in where there's at least 1.2 million Pakistani Americans at stake, and their lives at stake, and the properties at stake. If their country is burning down, sure, it might not be geopolitically relevant, but this is where the leadership of America comes in. And if they can weigh in, if they can have a swing at it, then I'm sure it'll be covered by the mainstream press. But short of Ryan's former publication, The Intercept and Dropsite, and a couple of other newspapers or independent publications here or there, it's been cursory. But I understand it. But the onus really is on the administration of this country to really make a story out of it, give journalists something to think about and write about and broadcast about. That's where leadership must play a role in filling that information loop.
Thank you, Malika.
Yeah, I think it's so important, the point that Wajahat just raised, in terms of what the leadership here says. It has, whether or not it has an impact among the American general public, we know that it has a huge impact in Pakistan, both in terms of how ordinary Pakistanis see U.S. congressional representatives supporting them in this hour of need, and also in the way the Pakistani officials have responded. Over the past couple of months, we had 2 letters come out on Pakistan, congressional letters that combined almost 100 congressional representatives had signed off on. They were about releasing political prisoners and restoring democracy and human rights and all of those things. And when those letters came out, and again, this is not binding legislation, these are letters, the amount of impact it had within the Pakistani political leadership and elite was massive. We had the Foreign Office responding to it with proper statements. We had Pakistani parliamentarians saying, why are American congressional leaders talking about our internal politics? We could see in terms of the strong reaction that we got that this was painful for them. We know that the Pakistani government has hired a contractor, a PR person, to the tune of $1.5 million in order to counteract the activities of the diaspora here in trying to change the discourse about Pakistan. And so whatever the American congressional leaders or state leadership says here does have an impact. And so it's very important. And of course, that will also then impact the way the media approaches these news stories.
Thank you. As we're coming close to our 1.5 hour conversation, let's make this human. There was one of the journalists who was murdered. There are humans who are being impacted. There are times when you just look at the faces of individuals who are being impacted. I think Wajhat, your and Maid vlog, you showed somebody who was praying, and the military came in and threw them. And initially we thought the person was murdered, but he broke multiple bones. And now, despite that, his family is in prison and they're targeting. So speak about the humans and stories, if you could, that tells us that there are humans who are being affected and being murdered in this situation.
There's stories coming out every day, Senator, every day about what's been at play. The man you are naming was thrown off a container while he was praying. I've never seen such images come out. There's stories about this young man named Shahzad, who was the only breadwinner in a family of 9. He had come in to march and he was shot in the head. And while he was talking to his own sister, telling her how he's going to be just fine and he's going to be back soon. There's stories about Malik, Sadr Malik, who was from the same city my mother's from Mardan. Again, another young man who was on holiday from Dubai, where he was working, and he was killed. And once he was shot, his brother had to come in and had to wait for at least a day to claim the body of the deceased. And he could only claim the body of the deceased once he signed an affidavit affirming that he will not raise a finger against the state or not file any charges about this illegal killing. The stories are not limited to this massacre. This year, 7 of my colleagues have been killed in Pakistan's different provinces. A year and a half ago, almost 2 years ago at this point, one of my oldest colleagues and friends, Arshad Sharif, was assassinated, not in Pakistan, but in Africa. I decided we left around the same time. Mueed as well. Arshad and Mueed, in fact, took 2 different pivots. Mueed can weigh in on this as well. But Mueed ended up in the U.S. Arshad ended up in Africa. Arshad made a bad choice and paid for it, which is unfortunate. The stories continue every day. But the best part is, in all of this, that the people of Pakistan continue to be resilient. And for that resilience, they rely on platforms. And those platforms are under target as well. These stories that we know come out through Twitter. They come out through other social media, which are increasingly undergoing stringent regulations. Twitter, by the way, is outrightly banned. And now, to control social media more, another kind of crackdown, not one with sniper rifles, but one using tech, is underway. Pakistan is well on its way to becoming the most surveilled and monitored and regulated internet black holes in the world. Now, there are at least 110 million users who are cut off from 1 million websites, many social media platforms, and the new law is being legislated in a legislature just like this one right now, as we speak, for people to be in prison for 5 years, Senator, for one tweet. For one tweet, they can go into prison for 5 years if the state deems so. So all sorts of suppression are underway, all sorts of stories will be heard. But again, it is the onus of this great house and officers like you who must keep fighting the good fight for the constituents as well as that great country where I'm from, Pakistan as well.
Thank you for the powerful words. Moeed, do you want to add?
Senator, to add to Shahid Arshad Sharif's saga, the tragic part is this, that when he ran off to Dubai, he tried his level best to get a visa for United Kingdom or for United States, despite knowing the fact that he was a very prominent journalist, despite knowing the fact that there were about 16 or 18 cases registered against him for terrorism, despite knowing all his credentials, his documentary making. He was one of the most prominent Pakistani television anchor persons, one of the most highly paid in the country, who was known. The British High Commission in Dubai and the US Embassy refused giving him the visa. And the argument they adopted was this, that first he has to go back to Pakistan and they cannot give him the visa from Dubai, knowing fully well his sets of circumstances, that he was running off for his life and his life wasn't threatened and he was continuously standing in the courts. I mean, knowing all this, the US Embassy and the British High Commission didn't grant him the visa. So it is not a matter of making a bad choice. I mean, he had no choice. I mean, and he was, and then the Pakistani authorities, when he was in Kenya, was in touch with me on WhatsApp. We spoke more than once, and he told me that how the Abu Dhabi, the Dubai Department of Police, and the local security was coming under pressure from the Pakistani government agencies. How the officials of the Dubai police came to him and asked him that who is he, why the Pakistani government is after him. They told him that the Pakistani government was demanding his repatriation or expulsion from Dubai and hand over to the Pakistan. So he explained to them his circumstances. He was in panic. He told them that he shouldn't be handed over to Pakistan. In the end, the Dubai authorities told him they decided that they're not going to hand him over to Pakistani intelligence or the government, but they asked him to leave. They gave him just 2 or 3 days to leave Dubai. It was in that state of panic that someone advised him to go to Kenya, which was the only country where he could travel without visa at the time from Dubai, without the visa on a Pakistani passport. So such were his sets of circumstances. Once again, Shahid Arshad Sharif's case has not been taken up. I haven't seen any good story in New York Times or Washington Post, or despite the fact it was their responsibility, I haven't seen any major publication in the world taking up and investigating this, putting up 1 or 2 reporters or a team to investigate the sets of circumstances in which Arshad Sharif was actually murdered. And I mean, the Kenyan court some months ago just made it very clear, after some hearing, that Arshad's murder was not an accident. So they had basically, concluded that Arshad's murder was a planned, premeditated, thing. It was not an accident. It wasn't really what was police actually telling. Now, coming to the man who was thrown from the container, his name was Tahir Abbas. His life has only been saved. Initially they thought that he's dead and they were looking for him. But then the authorities in Pakistan, military, found out that he was actually under treatment because both his forearms were fractured, and he also had injuries on his leg and his spinal cord. So they found out that he was under treatment at Pakistan Institute of Medical Sciences called PIMS in Islamabad. Just look at the situation in Pakistan, that this man who was seriously injured, the doctors are so much under pressure, which has not even happened in First World War or Second World War. The kind of situation that prevails in Gaza now prevails in Pakistan. That the PIMS doctors handed him over to police and he disappeared. His life has been spared only because they were worried that international media will reach out to him. They wanted to perhaps wanted to eliminate him or wanted to pressurize him to keep his mouth shut. Not only they took him away and he disappeared from the PIMS, he just appeared disappeared in the last 24 hours. I'll explain you how and why. So he disappeared from PIMS. His brother, whose name is Naveed, his name is Naveed Abbas. He's a resident for the past several years in Spain. He came out, made a video statement on the Twitter. He reached out to the Pakistani American diaspora within the United States. There was a Zoom meeting between him, Atif Khan, and several other people, which I attended, and I think Mahalika was also in that Zoom meeting. And this is how the Pakistani military got a nerve. And now this is known. And in the meantime, they had also taken hold of his father, his one other brother, his brother-in-law, and his uncle, and his wife, his children, and all the family were in the district of Mandi Bahabuddin. So now in order to make a good PR for the KP Chief Minister Ali Amin Gandapu, he has been handed over to Ali Amin Gandapu. But he's not talking anything. He's not registering any case against the Ranger officials. I mean, if Pakistan were a half decent, normal country, then the government would have nothing else suspended the Ranger officials. The soldiers would have registered a case against them had it been the United States. But in Pakistan, the case has to be registered against them by this man. And of course, he's not in a situation the way they have asked him to register a case against the army soldiers who have done this to him. So this is the human side of the story. I mean, I hope it helps.
Thank you so much. Today we are trying to raise the awareness for the larger population in the state of Connecticut and beyond to know that there are things that are happening that are relevant to us. And I'm involved in this because many of my people in the community, the constituents, have reached out and they said, how is it that our citizens, our neighbors don't even know that one of the most populous countries in the world is at the brink of a huge disaster, where the citizens are being shot, where there was a massacre for people asking for democracy, their right to speak. And the thing that we take for granted in the United States. So this is what we take for granted in this beautiful, beautiful country and beautiful state in the United States is something that we should cherish. But at the same time, that comes with a responsibility to stand up for those who do not have that right. And our conversation today was focused on raising that awareness, bringing it home so that people understand that this is very real and it's our responsibility to understand what's going on and speak out about this and expect our people who are in the position elected to be able to address some of these issues to represent our values and make sustainable policies. In this building where we are right now, we talk about sustainability. And every time we talk about a policy for the state, we don't want short-term policies, we want long-term policies. And I wish the federal government, for some of the policies that they make, are going to be long-term policies, because right now, everything is so myopic and short-term without any thought process. It does not represent the values of every single person, no matter which political party that I interact with. That is not represented, at least in this current situation that I am hopefully able to highlight today. So thank you so much, Wajahat. Thank you, Moeed. Thank you, Ryan. And thank you, Mahalika. And thank you all the people who are listening in and joining us. Thank you, and Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.
Walaikum salam. Thank you so much for organizing this.
Thank you so much.
Good to see you, Doc.
Thank you, Wajahat. Same to you.
We should talk. It's been a while.
Definitely. I'll brief you on something else.